A few years back, before I left for college, my parents bought what they called their dream home. To me, it felt more like a nightmare waiting to happen. We moved out of the suburbs and into a massive house tucked away deep in the woods. It wasn't just a little bigger than our old place. It was practically a mansion, at least through my teenage eyes. There were only three of us living there, but my parents used the excuse of visiting relatives as justification for the upgrade. Truthfully, I think they were just chasing the fantasy of owning an old estate. The place had been standing for more than a century, with high ceilings, endless hallways, and more rooms than we had any use for. It was impressive, but from the very first night, it gave me chills. I wasn't the type that scared easily, but being alone in that house was different. Every spare room, every hallway, every dark corner seemed to hold something hidden. It was the kind of place where silence felt heavy, pressing in on you, making you second-guess every creak of the floorboards. So when my parents decided to fly out for a week to visit family, I volunteered to stay behind. I didn't want to miss school, and besides, I figured I could handle a few quiet nights alone. Looking back, I wish I had gone with them. The first 2 days went fine. I went to school, hung out with friends, and distracted myself with video games when I got home. The house was too big and too quiet, but nothing strange happened. It wasn't until the third night that things shifted. I got home around 7 p.m., after grabbing food with some friends. The sky was already dark, the woods outside swallowing the house in shadows. I tossed my backpack by the front door and trudged upstairs, ready to collapse in bed. But when I glanced down the long main hallway, I froze. One of the spare bedroom doors was open. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Probably I just overlooked it. Still, unease crawled through me as I stepped closer. The room was almost empty, just a bed frame and a few mismatched pieces of furniture. Nothing out of place. Nothing moved. I shut the door and stood there for a long moment. My room was at the very end of the hallway, which meant I passed by these doors multiple times a day. I couldn't imagine missing that one standing wide open. And in a house like this, open doors felt wrong, like mouths yawning into the dark.
I tried to relax in bed, the TV buzzing faintly in the background. Every so often, I'd mute it, straining to hear the house. A century-old mansion has plenty of noises, wood settling, pipes groaning, but each sound felt magnified when you were the only one listening. An hour later, I decided to get dinner. The kitchen sat on the far end of the first floor, past wide living rooms and shadowed corners. Another thing about the house, you never had every light on at once. Whole sections of it would remain in shadow as you moved through, which made it feel less like a home and more like a maze. As I cooked, I kept glancing toward the living room. More than once, I thought I saw movement in the dark, a figure shifting maybe, or something brushing past the window. Each time I looked directly, the room was still and empty. I laughed at myself, muttering, "You're just spooked." But when I carried my plate back upstairs, I nearly dropped it. The spare bedroom door was open again. My heart skipped. I knew I had closed it. I knew it. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring down the hallway. It was pitch black past the first door, the shadows thick and heavy. I forced myself to walk toward it, though every step screamed at me to stop. I shoved the door open wider. The room was the same as before, bare, silent, lifeless. I searched for signs, scuff marks, footprints, anything, but there was nothing. No evidence that anyone had been inside. Shaking, I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. I texted my parents, trying to sound casual. "Hey, has that spare room door ever opened on its own?" They replied quickly, "Not that we've noticed. Why?" I told them not to worry, probably nothing. But my gut told me otherwise. Something about that house wasn't right. 10 minutes later, while I was eating, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, in the hallway outside my room. My blood turned cold. I muted the TV just in time to hear a soft thump right outside the door. I sat frozen, too afraid to breathe. Then came the knock. Not frantic, not demanding, just a calm, deliberate tap, tap, tap. It was so surreal I almost thought I had imagined it. But no, each knock vibrated through the wood, echoing in my bones. My voice cracked as I shouted, "Who's out there? I've called the cops already!" A lie. My phone was still in my hand, untouched. The response? 3 more slow knocks, each one dragging out longer than the last. That was when I finally dialed. My hand shook as I whispered to the operator, giving the address, begging them to come fast. "What is the person doing right now?" the operator asked. I opened my mouth to answer and froze, because just then, a new sound scraped against the door. It wasn't knocking, it wasn't footsteps, it was the long, deliberate drag of metal across wood. Shrink. I nearly dropped the phone. "They're scratching at the door," I hissed. "They have something, please hurry." The operator told me to stay calm, help was on the way, but the scratching grew longer, deeper, until I imagined the blade carving right through. Then, the handle began to rattle, back and forth, sharp jerks testing the lock. I backed away, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The rattling stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. Then, 3 more knocks. Calm, patient, almost playful. I don't know how long I stood there shaking. It felt like forever, but in reality it was 10 agonizing minutes before the red and blue lights finally splashed across my window. The police found nothing. No intruder, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. But when they looked at my bedroom door, their faces darkened. There, carved deep into the wood, was a single long gash, a knife mark, proof that someone had been there, standing just inches away from me on the other side. They searched the property, but the house had too many entrances, too many windows with unreliable locks. It would have been easy for someone to slip in and out. The officers gave the usual reassurances, told me to stay with friends if I could. But when they left, I knew the truth. The house wasn't safe. My parents cut their trip short and flew home the next day. They tried to play it down, suggesting it was a prank or a squatter passing through, but I saw the look in their eyes when they saw the scratch in the door. They knew, just as I did, that someone had been inside. After that night, the house never felt the same. Every hallway seemed darker. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I couldn't walk past the spare room without my stomach twisting. And then, a week later, it happened again. Not inside the house this time. I was in my room, staring out into the woods, when I saw it. A shape standing among the trees, tall, motionless, too far to make out details. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, watching. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. My parents eventually sold the house, just a few months after the incident. We never spoke about it much again. They pretended it was because of the commute, the isolation, but I knew the truth. The house didn't want us there. Or worse, it wasn't the house at all. Maybe it was someone who knew we were isolated, someone who waited until I was alone, someone who stood behind that door with a knife, scratching, knocking, listening to me tremble on the other side. Whatever it was, it followed me in my nightmares for years. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear it. Tap. Tap. Tap.
It was a pretty normal Friday night for me, nothing exciting. I lived alone in a small single-story house in the suburbs. Nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room barely big enough for my couch and TV. It was quiet, predictable, and just far enough from the city to feel safe. I worked about an hour away downtown, and by the time I got home each night, I was usually too drained to do anything besides eat, shower, and crash. But Friday nights were different. Friday meant freedom. It meant I didn't have to set an alarm. It meant I could stay up late, drink a little, play video games, and do absolutely nothing without guilt. That night was no exception. I took a quick shower, cracked open a couple of beers, fired up the PlayStation, and let myself sink into the weekend. The night passed in the kind of blur I loved. YouTube videos running on the TV while I gamed, phone buzzing with random notifications I ignored, the comfortable haze of alcohol making everything feel softer. By around 11, I was hungry again, and the thought of reheating leftovers just didn't sound appealing. That's when I decided to order pizza. There was a local shop a couple miles away that had an app for online orders. I placed it without much thought. One medium, a side of breadsticks, nothing fancy. I leaned back on the couch, put another video on, and waited. After 45 minutes, I realized I still hadn't gotten a text saying my order was on the way. Usually I'd get some kind of update within half an hour. I grabbed my phone and checked the app. There it was. Sorry for the delay. Your order will be on the way soon. The message was generic, almost too generic, but I didn't think much of it. No big deal. I wasn't starving, and honestly, I was trying to stay up late anyway. Except, as I sat there, my eyelids started getting heavy. The beers were catching up with me, the TV was droning in the background, and the warmth of the living room lulled me. I told myself I'd just rest my eyes while waiting. I don't know how long I was out, but the sudden sound of the doorbell jolted me awake. Not once, not twice, multiple times, ringing rapidly, almost impatiently. I shot up, still groggy, brain foggy from sleep and alcohol. My first thought was obvious, the pizza. I stumbled to the door, already fishing from my wallet out of habit. I pulled it open and blinked against the porch light. A man stood there. "Sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long," I mumbled, still half asleep. "How much do I owe you?" But the words hung awkwardly in the air. The man wasn't holding any pizza boxes. He didn't have an insulated delivery bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just dark jeans and a gray hoodie with the hood pulled up. His hand stayed shoved deep in the front pocket. He stared at me for a moment, expression blank, almost like he didn't understand what I'd said. Then his lips curled into a small smile. "Don't worry, the pizzas are still on the way."
He didn't elaborate, didn't move, just stood there, smiling faintly like that was a perfectly normal response. Something in my gut twisted. Even in my sluggish, fogged-up state, I knew something about the exchange was wrong, off. Why would someone show up at my house to tell me the pizzas were still on the way? But I was tired, drunk, caught off guard. Instead of questioning him, I nodded slowly. "Okay." Then I closed the door. I remember standing in the hallway for a second afterward, rubbing my face, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The more I replayed it in my head, the stranger it felt. No food, no uniform, no explanation. Just that weird smile and vague comment. But I brushed it off. Told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't in the right headspace to judge what was weird and what wasn't. I sat back down on the couch, put on another video, and eventually drifted off again. That's when I woke up the second time. Not to the doorbell, not to a knock, to a click. It was subtle, but sharp enough to jolt me awake instantly. My first thought was that it sounded like the front door latch settling into place. I sat up, listening, heart pounding. No other noises followed. The video on the TV was still playing, so I knew I hadn't been out for long. Confused, I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, and my stomach dropped. It was 4 a.m. 4 in the morning. I placed the order at 11.
I opened the app and scrolled through the order history. The message showed the order had been delayed for an hour before being canceled by the shop. Canceled! Hours ago! Which meant there was no delivery driver. No one should have been at my door. So who the hell was the man in the hoodie? My chest tightened. I got up and crept toward the front door. Every step down that dark hallway felt heavier. I leaned toward the peephole. Nothing but an empty porch and a silent street beyond. Relief started to trickle in, until I reached for the lock. It was already unlocked.
That click I heard when I woke up, it wasn't random. It was the door sliding shut, latching. My blood went cold. I replayed the earlier interaction in my head with horrifying clarity. Me assuming he was the delivery guy, me blurting it out before he said anything, him just going along with it. He hadn't come with pizza. He hadn't come with any good intentions. He had just smiled, agreed with me, and waited. And I had left the door unlocked, which meant he could have come back inside at any point. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than before. I turned, scanning the hallway, the living room, the kitchen beyond. My gut screamed at me to get out. I tiptoed back toward the couch where my phone was charging, moving as silently as I could. My fingers brushed the phone, and that's when I heard it. Movement. Not from outside, from inside. Somewhere in the back room, a faint shuffle, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. Panic surged through me. I snatched my phone, bolted to the front door, yanked it open, and sprinted into the street. Barefoot, adrenaline pumping, I didn't stop until I was a block away. Only then did I dial 911 with shaking hands. The police arrived quickly, but of course by then the man was gone. They searched the house thoroughly, no signs of forced entry, no broken locks. But they didn't have to break anything because I had left the door unlocked. Nothing was missing, no evidence. Just me standing outside my house in the early morning hours trying to explain the strangest, most terrifying encounter of my life. I told them everything I remembered, the gray hoodie, the jeans, the way he smiled when I asked about the pizza, the exact words he used. They took notes, promised to patrol the area, and that was it. No follow-up, no answers, just a file in some report. I think about that night all the time. Was it just horrible coincidence that my order got canceled the same night some random guy decided to show up at my door? Or was he watching me, waiting? Maybe he saw me stumble out of my car earlier, tired from work and tipsy from beer. Maybe he chose me because I looked like an easy target. I can't shake the feeling that he knew I hadn't locked the door, that he stood outside listening for the click of the deadbolt, waiting for me to pass out. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't recognized that sound, I don't think I'd be here writing this. It still chills me to think about how close I came. And the worst part, I never even got the pizza.
In mid-2019, I moved to a new town for work. The job itself seemed like a good opportunity at the time, but I didn't have much money when I got it. That meant I didn't have the luxury of being picky when it came to housing. I found the cheapest apartment I could, an old, run-down complex with only 4 units in total. The one I rented was on the 2nd floor, a small 1-bedroom. It was outdated, the paint was chipped, the floors creaked, and the neighborhood wasn't exactly the safest. But the price was right, and I told myself it was temporary, just somewhere to stay until I got back on my feet and could afford something better. For the first 3 months, I was the only tenant. The other 3 units were completely vacant, which was honestly unsettling. The building always felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Sometimes I'd come home late from work and walk up the outdoor stairs with the entire place in darkness. No lights in the windows, no sounds from neighbors, just me and the echo of my own footsteps. Still, I dealt with it. Work was exhausting enough that I barely had time to think about my apartment anyway. The job was more stressful than I expected, late nights, constant overtime, a boss who always seemed angry. Most nights I dragged myself home, collapsed in bed, and repeated the cycle. Then came the night everything changed. I got home around 8 p.m., barely awake. I slipped off my shoes, shuffled down the short hallway toward my bedroom, and was just about to collapse on the bed when there was a sudden knock on my door. It startled me. I hadn't seen anyone when I came in. I froze for a second, debating whether I even wanted to answer. The peephole on my door was basically useless. The glass was scratched or stained, and all I could see was a blur of shapes. I hesitated, then unlocked the door and opened it. Standing there was a man I'd never seen before. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Dark hair streaked with gray, stubble on his face. His eyes were the kind that stick with you. Sharp, piercing, unsettling in a way I couldn't put my finger on. "Can I help you?" I asked, already uneasy. His eyes widened slightly, and after a pause, he asked, "Do you live here?" The question threw me off. Who asks that? Still, without thinking too much, I said, "Yeah." He smiled, showing too many teeth, and said he was moving into the unit next to mine. He wanted to introduce himself. I waited for him to give his name, but he never did. Just smiled again, waved awkwardly, and walked toward the unit beside mine. I heard the door open and shut. It was strange, but also a small relief. Finally, I thought, I wouldn't be the only one in the entire building.
The next day was another long grind at work. When I came home that evening, the outdoor stairs creaked under my tired steps. As I reached the second floor, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The blinds in the window of the unit next to mine shifted. They swayed like someone had just pulled them back to peek out. The moment I turned my head, they fell still. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was paranoid after the weird introduction the night before. I hurried to my apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I'd barely been there 30 seconds when there was another knock. I already knew who it was. Sighing, I went to the door. Out of habit, I glanced through the peephole, forgetting it didn't work, then opened it. The same man stood there, wearing the same expression as the night before. "Is there something you need?" I asked. "I just got home and I'm kind of in a rush." He didn't seem to notice my tone. "Do you know how the thermostat works in these units? Must be too old to figure it out." He chuckled softly, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. It was such a simple question, and I almost laughed at how unnecessary it was. These thermostats had just a couple buttons: heat, cool, up, down. Anyone could figure it out. I explained it quickly, hoping he'd be satisfied. But he shook his head and said, "Could you show me? I tried what you said already." I hesitated. "I really don't have time. It'll only take 30 seconds, he interrupted, his voice polite but insistent. "I really need the heat working. It's freezing tonight." It was cold, and part of me felt guilty. After a moment, I sighed. "Fine." He smiled and led me down the short balcony walkway to his unit. The door was already ajar. But when I reached the doorway, I stopped dead.
The inside of the unit was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The walls were peeling. The carpet was stained. The air smelled of rot and mildew. There wasn't a single piece of furniture, not even a moving box. This place hadn't been rented out. The man glanced back at me. "Come on, it's just right here." I didn't move. My instinct screamed at me that something was wrong. His expression shifted. The friendly mask dropped, replaced by something darker. Disappointed, angry. He stepped toward me, his tone changing. "Come in."
I stumbled back. "No, I need to go." I turned and bolted for my apartment. Behind me, his footsteps echoed, quick and heavy. I slammed my door shut and locked it. A second later, the handle rattled. He was trying to open it. My hand shook as I dialed 911. On the other side of the door, his voice shifted back to that fake friendliness. "Hey, what's wrong? I just needed your help. Come on, it'll only take a minute." He knocked a few more times, but when I told the dispatcher what was happening, his footsteps retreated. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. The officers searched the complex. That unit? Still vacant, completely unoccupied. He had broken in and been staying there, probably for days, watching me, learning my schedule, waiting for the right moment. They never found him. I moved out as soon as I could, breaking the lease without hesitation. To this day, I can't shake the thought of what would have happened if I'd stepped inside that apartment, because I don't think I would have come back out.